Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm your host, Marcellus. In this country, according to the Constitution of the United States, a presumption of innocence goes with a person that's arrested. They're presumed innocent until they are found guilty. It's not they're presumed innocent until they exonerate themselves. It's the burden is always on the state to prosecute a person beyond a reasonable doubt. We have a situation today where a man that is innocent, not by me saying this, but by the very people that prosecuted him saying this, that he's innocent. Not me saying this, the evidence, the DNA evidence is saying this. Not me saying this, but a preponderance of evidence and people coming out on behalf of Marcellus William Khaliifah, better known as Khaliifah, who is slated to be executed the 24th of this month. Joining me today is a supporter and an advocate for Khaliifah is Michelle Smith. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the space to talk about Khaliifah's case.
Okay, so let's start right here. First, tell us a little bit about what you do. Then we'll go into like what's going on with Khaliifah.
Sure. So, well, as far as myself and my organization, I am the co-director of Missourians to Abolish the Death Penalty. We are the only statewide entity in Missouri that primarily fights to get rid of capital punishment. That is our main goal. And in doing that, we do a lot of different things. We do things from legislative advocacy, trying to change the actual law, to, connecting with our community and educating our citizens about the usage of the death penalty in Missouri. So, and also we advocate for people who are on death row, which is what we're doing currently for Khaliifah. So, yeah, so we do a lot. And, this case right now, it is very dire. He has an execution date in 11 days. And so we're really trying to amplify his case, this injustice, and what is happening in our state concerning the pending execution of an innocent Black man.
All right, so let's right there. Okay, an innocent Black man. All right, make the case based on what the facts say. Why he's innocent, but start with what they say that he allegedly done.
Sure. So in 1998, there was the victim is named Felicia Gale, and she was in her home, and there was a person who entered her home and brutally killed her, and it was a tragic situation for sure. I never want to take away from that. A family lost.
Right.
And so after this happened in 1998, a few months prior, another woman had been murdered in her home in a similar fashion. And the medical examiner at the time said, they looked similar, but also the way that they were killed with a knife from their home. And also this knife was basically left sticking out of their bodies. So the medical examiner thought that, there was some similarities. Maybe it was some type of serial killer situation. But both of the cases went cold for a very long time. There were no suspects and no one arrested in either of those cases. A little over a year later, the victim in this case, Mrs. Gale, her husband, who is a doctor, he decided to offer a $10,000 reward for someone to come forward with information because, he and his family wanted justice for the killing of his wife.
Right.
Once he offered that $10,000 reward, several people came forward basically saying that Khaliifah had confessed to killing this victim. And those people one was a girlfriend, someone he was dating, and another person was a person he met in jail. So, we all call that a jailhouse foreman or jailhouse snitch, right? So these two particular people who I've actually learned knew each other, the informant and the person in jail and the girlfriend. So they both said Khalifa basically told them that he had killed this victim. And the main crux of the case during that time, and he went to trial in 2001. So
That's right.
yeah, so several years after the murder, he went to trial. The informants both received money. They received $5,000, and in one case with the jailhouse informant, he actually met the victim's husband at the prosecutor's office, where the victim's husband handed him $5,000 in cash. So it's just egregious.
Right.
But the main crux of the case at that time was these two people's statements and the fact that Khalifa was in possession of the victim's laptop computer. Now, you and I both know that, there is a time, and even still today, stolen property is sold, handed off, etc. And so, the fact that Khalifa had her laptop was not necessarily surprising to me, because, people do trade in stolen property.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the girlfriend, at the time, who said, Khalifa had the laptop, it was later found out that she's the one who gave him the laptop, because she got it off the street. Again, at that point, it had been stolen property. So he had been in possession of the victim's laptop, and these people said that he told them that he had done this. But when we look at the actual evidence, and when I say evidence, I mean physical evidence, right? Not only blood at the scene, but things like footprints. There was a bloody footprints left at the home from the person, who had did this. Those did not match Khalifa. Also, the victim, of course, she struggled, right? This was, a brutal situation. And the victim was clutching hairs in her hand of the perpetrator, the person that had harmed her. And when they tested those hairs that was clutched in her hand, they did not match Khalifa either. Any fingerprints in the home did not match him either. And the blood on the knife also did not match Khalifa. So there is no physical evidence that actually matches Khalifa in this case. Again, the only thing that the prosecution originally, put their case on is these two witnesses, quote unquote, who said that Khalifa told them that he did it, and the fact that he had items of the victims in his possession, including her laptop.
Okay, answer this. Okay, all right, for the benefit of our audience.
Go ahead.
Because the area that you're talking about, that he got locked up, the Innocent Project, the DNA became like the national standard for exonerating. Kurt Bloodworth, they got a law called the Kurt Bloodworth law, but Kurt Bloodworth was locked up with me, and Kurt Bloodworth was locked up in the 85 or 86, and Kurt Bloodworth was locked up for allegedly raping and killing a little young girl. They had the underwear of the little young girl in their possession, the state did, and never tested it. So when they ultimately tested it, it exonerated him. But what that did, that started this national campaign to give value to DNA evidence. Right. That's what this did. So whenever, and I'm setting this backdrop up. So whenever DNA evidence came up during that period, during the late 90s, or in that whole 90 and 2000 of the OJ, you had like DNA evidence was like the crux. I mean, it was like the end of all. Why wasn't this evidence taken into, why wasn't this evidence, which is evidence that's scientifically sound evidence, because you got hundreds of thousands of people that are locked up right to this day based on DNA evidence. Why was this evidence excluded and didn't go towards his innocence, to your knowledge?
Well, I'll say a couple things. First, getting DNA tested in cases is always and often contentious. So often the courts don't approve the testing. You assume that when a case has some type of evidence, it is automatically tested. That's not necessarily the case. So in Marcellus's or Khalifa's case, the forensic evidence, the DNA, was not tested until 2015. And I mean the current good DNA testing, not just like a blood test, but actually
right.
Yeah. So it was conducted in 2015. And during that time, what happened was the DNA on the weapon, it was not Khalifa's DNA, but whoever's DNA was, it was unknown. Then they
Right.
didn't know who. So of course the assumption is the DNA must match the perpetrator, right? And they did not know who that was. They were not allowed to run the DNA through the FBI system. I think it's called CODIS. They were not allowed to run it through the system. So for many years, that DNA went unknown. However, a few weeks ago, probably mid-August, some DNA testing was conducted further on that knife. And when that testing came back, they had tested the prosecutor who originally, prosecuted the case in 2001 and one of his investigators. And interestingly enough, the DNA came back to match them. So what that told the current prosecutor's office is that the evidence was contaminated, right? Because
Right.
obviously the prosecutor didn't do it himself, right? So
Right.
the fact that the DNA on the knife matched him, meaning that there was some contamination that happened, there was some mishandling of the evidence, right? And so the fact that the reality is the prosecutor's DNA is on the weapon and also that investigator means that there was some type of breakdown in the chain of custody and the handling of that material. And a few weeks ago, August 28th, when the hearing was held, that original prosecutor, he got on the stand and testified. And he basically said that, yes, I did handle the knife without any gloves. He said, the trial again happened 3 years after the murder. And because they had already run the fingerprint testing and the blood testing, he felt like it was okay for him to handle the knife without gloves. I actually said he did it all the time, which is concerning to me, right? And so that's how his DNA got on the knife. He handled it without gloves. He had he said he pulled it out of the package and put the evidence sticker on it. And, he showed it to several of the witnesses to confirm that that's the knife that they saw, the witnesses being the police officers. And he did. So the fact that the weapon was mishandled and the evidence contaminated obviously means that there's something going on, because had the prosecutor not done that, right, it's possible that the actual perpetrator's DNA would have still been found on the knife. But because it had been mishandled, right now the DNA, again, does not match Khalifa, but it is proven that the evidence has been mishandled. So that is why there is such contention around the DNA evidence in this case.
I talk about this here. What about the hair follicles? Was there anything come out in terms of like testing that against Khalifa's hair follicles?
Yes, and none of the other evidence matched Khalifa. The hair, the footprints, the fingerprints. There is no physical evidence in that home, in that murder scene, that matched Khalifa. The only evidence they had was the fact that he was in possession of the victim's laptop, and that these two people said that he told them he did it. They didn't see it happen. They weren't there either. But they both said that he told. And the person from jail, interestingly enough, he did not know that man. He had just, been in jail with him for a few days, up to a week. So the fact that you would even be in jail with someone and just confessing to them that you people, that doesn't make any sense to me.
That's a common phenomenon in prison. People they sit around and they look at the paper and they read about somebody's case and they use that to get out. They call the state's attorney. The state's attorney, don't even look and see whether or not it's any validity to it. But let's talk about the the current prosecutor. And the current prosecutor and them and the states represent saying like they are saying that he should be released or he should definitely not be executed. Talk about that. Talk about that right there.
Sure. So in our state, in 2021, there was a law passed in Missouri, and that law says that the local prosecutor, which is the office that, prosecuted a person, that local prosecutor has the right to bring forth a case, a motion to court to ask the court to set aside, a judgment or vacate a conviction. And that happens when the attorneys for the person who was convicted brings evidence to the prosecutor, and then he himself in his office reviews the evidence. So it's not that a prosecutor just brings any case. He actually has his own staff review the evidence, his investigators, he runs the testing, et cetera. And once he was done reviewing this case, he decided that, yes, this case is not something I would have, brought to court if I had been in court at that time. Our office messed up, our office mishandled evidence, and our office convicted someone who we today believe who is not guilty, who is innocent. And so because of all of those reasons, the prosecutor brought the motion to court, asked the judge to review it and to vacate that conviction. But there is another party in this matter, which is the state attorney, the Attorney General of Missouri.
Right.
And so the Attorney General of Missouri, has the right to challenge the local prosecutor's assertions. And this has been done several times. Now, in the past 3 times it has been used since 2021, the person was exonerated and freed. And none of those people were on death row. All 3 of those people had life sentences.
Right.
One was in prison 28 years, one was in prison 34, and one was in prison for 42 years. And each of those, all of them were Black men. And each of those Black men have been exonerated and released after decades incarcerated. But in this particular case, when the prosecutor brought forth the case and asked for it to be reviewed, the state attorney general has tried to block him at every point, at every turn. They were going to take an Afford plea, which is basically a plea deal,
right.
have some evidence, but that still there is doubt in that conviction. And the judge was going to accept that Afford plea, and in exchange, they were going to give a Khaliifah a life imprisonment sentence. Now, life in prison is still right, a conviction and incarceration. However, it would have saved his life. He would not have to face an execution. But the state attorney general went to the Supreme Court that evening, asked them to throw out, this plea deal and hold a hearing. And once that hearing was held, the judge then reviewed the evidence, and it came out yesterday. So the judgment came out yesterday. And it said that basically the DNA evidence that, again, points to the prosecutor, meaning that it was contaminated, is not, quote unquote, clear and convincing. There's a very high bar when we're talking about innocence. There's a very high bar a person has to meet. And the judge does not feel that this case meets that high enough bar in order to vacate the conviction. So the judge denied the motion to vacate the conviction. So at this point, again, Khaliifah is facing execution on September 24th. His attorneys, as well as the local prosecutor, are trying to figure out their next legal move in court. I'm not quite sure what that is, but of course they can go to the state Supreme Court. They can also go to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so we anticipate them doing that. And I'm sure that they're going to keep fighting to bring justice to this case and to exonerate Khaliifah and also stop his impending execution. But we
I got you. And also, I know, I already know we like this is literally like you say, the 11th hour. But also, if from my information is, the family members came out and said took a position on Khaliifah. What was that?
Yeah, in these cases, the victims' families don't always agree with the prosecution, and I think that's a fallacy that people assume so. But the victim's family, Mrs. Gale's family, have stated publicly that they don't believe in the death penalty. Again, her husband is a doctor, and I'm sure that him being a doctor, a person that is tasked with saving people's lives, is what grounds his own ideology in this. But the family is not for the death penalty. Now, the family believes that Khaliifah is guilty of the murder. They have stated that as well. They don't believe he's innocent. They believe he's guilty, but they also don't believe in death penalty. So they would be satisfied if he was just, incarcerated, right? But I explain to people often that the prosecutor, they don't always align with the family, right?
Right.
The prosecutor is a political position, and the decisions that they make in the office are often politically motivated. It's not always about the family. I've seen cases where there's one case of a man who the victim's family was his own family, because in his case, when he was 19, he killed a member of his family. I believe she was a great aunt. who was an elderly person, and he was doing drugs, sadly, and he killed his great aunt trying to get money. So, but the victim's family and his family are the same family. And that victim's family went to the governor, I believe it was Texas, and went to the governor of Texas and told him, we don't want our loved one killed. We understand what he did. We are a family of faith. We are a family of forgiveness, and we want him here. We believe that he's a better person, and we don't want to lose him. And the state said, we don't care what you think, and executed him anyway. So the prosecution is not always about the victims' families or the victims' loved ones or justice for the victim's family, because like in Khalifa's case, the victim's family does not agree with the death penalty. However, the state is still pushing for Khalifa to be executed. So it is not always what the victims want.
And we want to educate our audience on this point. Yeah. When they offer Khalifa alpha, because the alpha plea is a plea that's saying that I'm innocent. It's just that the circumstances, I can't overcome these circumstances at this time. It's not that they can't be overcome. It's just they can't be overcome at this time. So this is a better course. So if given the alpha plea, he still would have been able to pursue his quest to be exonerated, which is really what this is about, an innocent man. Talk about an innocent man getting ready to be legally murdered. Talk about the state of Missouri and how they is overwhelming numbers of blacks on death row? Is it just, or is this generally that they go out and they execute, or they try to get the death penalty across the board, or is it just like systemically poor people?
Interestingly enough, when we talk about, of course, racism is embedded in this system, capital punishment, death penalty system. It is the crutch of it, is how it was done. There was a time where we were lynched, right?
Yeah, come on.
They made it legal, and they made it state, and they made it in the gas chamber or an execution chair, but it's still state sanctioned murder. And since it is still embedded in racism, there is a little bit of difference. It's not necessarily the race of the defendant, which does has a part, right? Mm-hmm. But statistically, it's the race of the victim. Being a white female means that you're 3.5 times more likely to receive a death sentence. So if the victim is a white woman or a white female child, whoever the perpetrator is, never matter whoever. Right. Yeah, but that goes to show you who's valued in society, because if Khalifa's victim was a black man, right, or a black woman, he very likely would not be on death row right now. That's just the reality of the situation. So racism does definitely play a part. Who the victim is plays a huge part, but it is also, who the defendant is as well. And in our particular state, because, we are a state that held on to slavery. Actually, Missouri was the last slave holding state. Yeah. Yes. So Missouri is the South. I tell people that often. Missouri is the South. And when we look at it, we look at the lynchings in our state, and we can really overlay a map of the executions, and they almost match. So places that did, lynching, extrajudicial murders, now carries out the death penalty, capital punishment. It is definitely mostly black men for the most part, but the overwhelming majority of people are poor, and that's what we need to talk about too. People who are facing capital punishment or lengthy sentences in prison are poor, don't have access to the best legal help. In Khalifa's case, his attorneys back at that time, his defense attorneys today, those two men are judges, and they came to court and they said, listen, we were ineffective because we had another death penalty case at the time, and we were stretched thin. We were busy. We had more than one capital punishment case, and we did not do everything that we could for Khalifa because of that other case. And they actually admitted that in court as well. So the representation for people, most of the time get public defenders, and they don't have the robust, representation. Everybody's not OJ. Everybody cannot afford, Johnny Cochran and the great legal
dream team.
Exactly. And so most poor people are facing these particular punishments because they don't have access to that robust legal representation. And that's the crux of it. Even right now in our state, there are approximately 10 to 12 pending capital punishment cases, meaning they're sitting in jail waiting to go to trial, and they've been charged with murder and facing a death penalty. And guess what? All of those people right now are white men from rural Missouri. So they're from small towns in Missouri. They're all white men. And it's really an indictment again of our system. So when we talk about like racism and the division and the biases, we truly need to understand that our system, our country hates poor people overall.
Yeah. They
It
criminalize
doesn't matter
poverty.
what color you is. You if you're poor and you don't have access to resources or access to amazing litigation, etc., you are going to be victimized in this system.
They
So
criminalize poverty. They criminalize poverty. But look, before as we get ready to close out, talk about Khalifa, because I asked you earlier. I said, make the case for why you think he's innocent, and I'll leave that up to our viewers based on the preponderance of information that you gave us. This the facts of his case is in public record. But talk about Khalifa. How is he doing, and what kind of person is Khalifa for the benefit of our audience?
So Khalifa is, again, his birth name was Marcellus Williams. He has been a very devout Muslim for many, many years, and he took upon the Islamic name Khalifa upon his Shahada, which is that naming ceremony. He is also the imam at the prison he's in. So he is a person that is looked up to, that, is very admired. He guides the other Muslim men in that prison. And he's always, trying to make sure that he stays in alignment with Allah. And so because of that, he keeps his faith, right up front. And he is doing okay. We talked a few weeks ago, and he honestly encourages me, right? Because I'm not, I don't have the faith that he has. And so always concerned, asking me how I'm doing, telling me everything is going to be okay, because I'm a warrior, right? But he is very much that person that really stays calm, keeps other people calm around him, and has their perspective that everything is going to work out because he is such a faithful individual. He's also a father, a grandfather. He is very involved in his family. And he's a poet. Khalifa writes amazing poetry, and we put together a collection of his poetry as well. He's written poems about, one is called The Perplexing Smiles of the Children of Palestine. And it's an amazing poem about just the atrocities that are happening, to the Palestinian people. He's written a poem about like George Floyd and the issues of, what happened in 2020. So he's very in tune with what's going on today. And he has written some amazing poetry. So he's a beautiful, spirited person. He is definitely someone that has so much to give to others. And we are truly, fighting for his innocence and his life so that he can go on impacting people in a positive way.
So tell our audience right now, what can they do, how they can support and try to help reverse this process that we know that is going to take place unless we get some support and raise the voices of Khalifa.
Of course. So, of course, his legal team are doing all they can in court, and we appreciate that. But as far as the community, locally here in Missouri and nationwide, just amplify Khalifa's story in his case. Talk to your community members, talk to your family, talk to your loved ones about the fact that death penalty does not solve anything, and actually killing innocent people should be something we as a society should not be doing. We have a petition for Khalifa. We also have a webpage, which is www.freekhalifa.org. And his name is spelled Khaliifah. So freekhalifa.org. And it has a toolkit where we have graphics and we have information that you can share on social media. You can print also and share as well. We have a little email template that you can email our governor. Especially if you live in Missouri, you can definitely utilize that. So we're really asking people to learn and to amplify the case, amplify Khalifa's life and humanity. And we would love this to get as big as possible. Some people have made like videos on TikTok and Instagram, and those are amazing as well, because those get a lot of views and really inspire other people to learn more. And so that's truly what we're looking to do, amplify Khalifa's case. Next Tuesday, the 17th, from 6 to 9 p.m. Central, we will be going live on Instagram, bringing on several people to talk about Khalifa's case and, trying to do a social media push, really just to amplify the case again and to amplify his life and to, because a lot of people don't know what's happening. So we definitely want more people to understand what is going on and how it not only affects us in Missouri, it affects us nationwide, because we should have a stop at killing innocent people. That definitely is not something we should be doing.
Thank you. There you have it, the real news, Rattling the Bars. We ask that you review this information about Marcellus, Khaliifah Williams. We ask that you ask yourself, if you was in this situation, would you want to get a fair trial? Would you want people to really look at the information and the evidence? When you confronted with this information and this evidence, ask yourself, would you as a juror, if you knew all this as a juror, would you have found Khaliifah guilty of murder? Ask yourself if you as a juror would not be able to discern when a person have interest over humanity, where a person would take and sell somebody out for $5,000. They would sell somebody out for $5,000. Ask yourself, what would you do? We're asking that you look at this information and follow what Michelle was saying as far as on the Instagram, on their webpage. It's very interactive, and make your voice known, because if we continue to allow this country to execute people legally with impunity, then, as Angela Davis said, if they come for me in the morning, if they come for me at night, they'll come for you in the morning. And this is them coming for us in the morning if we don't raise the voice of Khaliifah. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we ask you continue to support Rattling the Bars and the real news, because we're actually the real news.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please, tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.